You know, we think we know T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. I mean, it's one of the most famous poems ever written. But what if I told you there's a hidden context, a secret key, that changes absolutely everything we thought we knew about it?
A line like that, it just pulls you right into this world of anxiety and decay. And for 100 years, we believe the key to that world was World War I. But what if there's another key, one we've only just found?
Okay, so let's start with the story we all know, the one that's been in every textbook since 1922.
For a solid century, this poem has been understood as the ultimate artistic reaction to the First World War. It's seen as this portrait of a shattered, godless Europe, the defining cry of the lost generation. And look, this reading makes total sense, but it might not be the whole story.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. While Eliot was writing about this massive cultural collapse, a totally different kind of apocalypse was unfolding all around him, one that history has almost completely managed to forget. So the war killed around 20 million people, a staggering number, but the Spanish flu pandemic, which was raging as Eliot wrote his masterpiece, killed at least 50 million people. It's one of the deadliest events in human history, and yet, for most of us, it's barely a footnote.
And that just begs a huge question, right? We build these giant monuments to soldiers, we tell epic stories about battles, but a plague that killed more than double the people. Why does it feel like this faint ghost in our history books?
Well, it really comes down to the stories we tell ourselves. War gets remembered as this collective, heroic sacrifice. We find meaning in it. But a pandemic? That's a whole different animal. It's this lonely, individual battle fought inside your own body. There's nothing heroic about it, just a helpless, private tragedy that we'd much rather forget.
So here's the crucial thing. Just because history has amnesia doesn't mean the people living through it did. And to see just how deeply this pandemic affected T.S. Eliot, we don't have to guess. All we have to do is read his mail. For Eliot, the flu wasn't some distant headline, it was in his house. He and his wife both got sick. His letters are filled with mentions of the mnemonic influenza that was everywhere. This period of constant illness and anxiety ended with him having a complete nervous breakdown right before he published the poem.
And you can just feel it in his own words. He describes the virus's symptoms with this chilling personal detail: a collapse, extreme dryness, a bitter taste. He wasn't just observing this from afar. He was a sufferer. He knew it intimately. Okay, so if Eliot was so physically and mentally soaked in this pandemic experience, is it possible he actually wrote it directly into the poem itself? Let's take a closer look.
There's this new wave of literary scholars who are arguing, pretty convincingly I think, that we can read the poem's most difficult, most confusing features not just as artistic choices, but as a shockingly accurate description of what it actually feels like to be severely ill. And the real key to unlocking this whole reading is one word: delirium. That disturbed mental state you get from a really high fever. You know the feeling, right? That restless, confused, half-dreaming state where nothing makes sense.
Now, with that idea of delirium in your head, listen to this line from the poem. Bats with baby faces crawling down a wall. Come on, that's not just some random spooky image. That is a perfect, almost clinical description of a feverish hallucination.
And it's not just in a few isolated lines. The entire structure of The Wasteland, the thing that makes it so hard to read, its fragmented nature, the way it jumps between scenes and speakers, you can read all of that as what scholars are calling a delirium logic. It mimics the disorganized, hallucinatory mind of a patient in the grip of a powerful fever.
Once you start looking for it, you see the physical symptoms everywhere. The repetition of burning, burning, burning. I mean, hello, that's a raging fever. That desperate line about no water, that's the feeling of extreme dehydration. Hushing the room enclosed perfectly captures the isolation of a sickbed, and the city's brown fog suddenly feels less like pollution and more like a metaphor for an airborne contagious threat.
But the poem doesn't just capture the feeling of being sick. It also paints this incredibly haunting picture of a world that's been completely devastated by the aftermath. Think about this for a second. The Wasteland is obsessed with death. It's jam-packed with bones and dead bodies. But here's the key. These aren't soldiers in faraway trenches. They're civilian corpses right there in the city, on the low, damp ground. This is the landscape of a plague, not a war. And that wasn't just some poetic flourish. Historians describe this exact scene happening in 1918. The piling up of bodies was a terrifying, overwhelming reality for cities all over the world. They literally ran out of places to put the dead.
And here, right here, is the most profound part of this whole reading. The poem isn't just about the pandemic, it actually embodies the forgetting of the pandemic. By never naming the flu directly, Eliot's poem mirrors society's own desperate silence and repression. It becomes a memorial to a trauma that everyone was living through, but absolutely no one knew how to talk about.
So you have to ask, why is this idea gaining so much steam now, a full 100 years after the poem was written? Well, the answer, of course, has everything to do with us.
Our own shared experience with a global pandemic has given us a brand new key. Suddenly, the confusion, the isolation, the fear, the specific language of contagion, it's all become painfully familiar. We can now read Eliot's poem with a kind of empathy, a visceral understanding that was basically impossible for generations before us.
Those historical accounts from 1918 that used to feel so distant, they suddenly have this visceral, haunting echo. The images of mass graves from a century ago rhyme with the unforgettable, terrible images captured by photojournalists in our own time. As the saying goes, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme.
And this all brings us to one final, really provocative thought. The wasteland now stands as this kind of accidental monument to a forgotten plague. And it makes you wonder, what art is being created right now that will speak for us? 100 years from now, when people look back, what will our pandemic's wasteland reveal about what we chose to remember and what we all tried so desperately to forget?